What is good, everyone? Welcome to the Outside the Box podcast. My name is Nick Ingvall, and on this show, I try to present to you a new way to think about the world of sneakers through conversations with creators, designers, and other industry insiders. My goal is to dissect their approach and learn new tips and tricks, strategies, and best practices that you and I can both use to carve our own lane in the sneaker game. I've got a good one for you today. On today's episode, I talk with my friend Seth Fowler. Seth has amassed over 700,000 followers on his sneaker-focused YouTube channel, and he has nearly 140 million views across his channels in total. Not to mention he's designed his own shoes, helped design shoes for Gary V's Vayner Media, recently started his own sock line that just opened its new headquarters, and many other things. Despite all the success, he's still one of the most humble guys I've met and shares some priceless knowledge in this conversation. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Got a very special opportunity to talk to one of my good friends in this whole sneaker thing today. I got Seth Fowler with me. So how's it going, Seth?
It's going good. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, doing pretty good, man. Just trying to prepare for the holidays and going to be a different kind of holidays this year, so.
Absolutely.
But so I was trying to think back to like when we actually first connected, and it was probably through Finish Line and Brandon Edler, that era when you were first starting, right? I think right. I can't remember. And then we've kind of zigged and zagged all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I've run into a few times at events and been like, dude, we gotta like connect. And it's like, okay, like years later, I'm actually on a call with you, but such is how it goes in the sneaker world, I think. So
definitely
everybody's moving at a rapid pace. So I guess for the people that don't know what you do, let's give them a little rundown of who you are and why you would be on this podcast talking about sneakers.
So I do reviews on sneakers on YouTube. That's sort of my main thing. But the reason I really got into that was obviously having a passion for sneakers, but also having a passion for design. And so that was something that I had done professionally before YouTube. And then getting into YouTube, I felt like it was sort of my unique thing that I had, that I'd sort of gone through manufacturing and gone through making things before. So YouTube sort of gave me the perfect way to incorporate or sort of mash up my two different passions together, which was design and sneakers. And so I've sort of just kind of expanded from there, and I've continued doing YouTube, and that's sort of just been a blessing. It's been a huge, huge blessing, and it's become my full-time job. And that's like one of those crazy things that you never actually expect to happen. And when it does, you're like, holy crap. But that's how I got here in a nutshell.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think that, your content has evolved in so many different ways. And I like that you've tried so many different things over the years. And I think, like for me personally, I love watching you draw. Like that's what drew me into your channel. And that's where I was like,
that's awesome.
Okay, this is something that I'm like, not that I don't, like I appreciate what you do. I'm not trying to discredit the other things, but like when you started doing that, it was like, wow, like, you have completely the upper hand in this because one, you're way more comfortable on camera than most of the designers that I know. And, that's something that I think most people would admit to. Like, I'm not as comfortable on camera as a lot of the people that I'm friends with, because I'm friends with a bunch of like YouTubers that have spent years refining that process. So it's one of those things that's really fascinating to me. But one thing that I wanted to actually ask you about specifically about that is when you've kind of obviously moved further away from that aspect. So I assume that one, it takes a heck of a lot more time to do that. But also I know that like the algorithm and the way that YouTube work makes branching off into new things challenging. So
Definitely.
How did that work for you? And what was your experience, in kind of thinking of how to approach both of those things? And I guess to follow that up, what would you suggest for people that maybe have multiple passions? We talked a little bit about that before we started recording, but I think that those two pillars for you are really fascinating in a way that, there's probably a lot of young people that could learn from your experience on that. So.
I guess for me, it was weird because when I first started the channel, I was just I was just reviewing sneakers, and I was inspired by people like T Blake and Yoanti and Franelations and all those people. And I thought that was really the only way to go about it. And so I really tried to emulate that. And that's what I had been doing for the first like 2 or 3 years of the channel. And then it was sort of like a light bulb thing where, because I'd been working at a design firm up in New York, and they're like, well, why don't you design a sneaker? Why don't you do something like that? And I was like, first of all, I don't think, because in my head, it's always been sort of product design, which is what I was doing, which was designing like chairs and tables and toys and things like that, versus fashion design, which I always thought sneakers was more of. And I think I'm definitely, I lean more on the product design side. Like, I'm not the most fashionable person in the world. So I don't think I'll ever be like, a designer like Tinker or anyone like that who really has that innate sense. So I never really thought about combining them. And then I just tried it. I honestly just tried it. And I did a video, where I kind of tried to hit a softball, and I did something about, designing an off-white Air Jordan 3, because in my head, it's like, it's just gonna be a BC3 with a couple off-white touches. And so that was sort of my first venture into that. And then it did pretty well. And I was like, okay, I'll keep doing this. And as I kept doing that, I tried to post more and more pictures. And that's when the opportunity with this company I work with called We Are Underdogs came around, where they're like, hey, we'd love to work with you on designing a sneaker. And I was talking to them for a while. And I also had the opportunity to work with Vayner Media on a Planters Peanuts like promo shoe, which, to be fair,
that was cool.
I love the way it came out, but I understand that people don't want to wear it every day because it's a blue and yellow shoe that says Planters on the back.
Yeah.
But for me, it was, and I still really want to take my channel in the design direction. But like you said, it's way more work than I think I even expected. I didn't realize that, not only just screen recording and then editing down all this footage, like hours and hours of footage, would take as long as it did. So that's why it's sort of been a little bit slower. But I didn't. One thing I really got a new respect for is the sneaker designers doing that, because just creating something that I thought I love, like the sneaker that I did with We Are Underdogs, I love, but seeing the reception from both sides, seeing people who like it and people who just absolutely just hate it, and not realizing, like, it gave me not only a new respect for the designers because they do this every day, and it's a much different animal designing shoes than it is designing anything else, but just understanding the response that they get online, like even from reviewers, but just from people on Twitter. Like when Kanye drops a new shoe, whoever designed that shoe definitely goes on Twitter and sees people saying like, what the hell? That's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. And like that, while it's, while it's not important what those people are saying, cause it's just noise, at the same time, like it still definitely hits you. So it's like seeing that from a designer point of view was definitely the biggest takeaway. And it really made me sort of refocus on reviewing sneakers and trying to see it from a more objective point of view. Even though I thought that I was being objective in the beginning, I realized there's really so much more to it. And so that's why I've slowed down a little bit on the design videos. One, because it takes a lot of time, but two, because I really want to sort of refine the way that I do it to create something that is going to be more, I guess, edifying and give people more, sort of help people learn and grow in that sort of space, but also create something that people want to watch, because I realize that just redesigning Yeezys, as fun as that is not going to be that interesting to people over time. So I really want to like work on maybe find a lane in where I can, I don't know, like do new takes on things or try new things. And I'm still kind of working that out. And to be honest with you, with the constant grind of like having to feeling like you need to put out new content, it's really hard to find the time to really work on a video that's going to take 4 days versus a video that takes like 3 hours. So
yeah, I can imagine, man. It's always crazy to me when I see people that, I mean, like we talked about before we started recording, Jacques and this, rap review that he just did, or rap unboxing, it's like that type of stuff. I mean, he and I are pretty good friends, and like I saw that in the works and like talked through some of the stuff with him, but like it's one of those things where like no matter what I see it and I'm like instantly like, man, I just want to be that creative, right? I just want to I want to go do something creative after watching that, because it's like it might not be like the best rap song, it might not be a pair of shoes that I even like, but it's like doing something in a way that like is different, right? It's forcing yourself to be out in that like discomfort area. But like the crazy part is like, I just see how much time goes into that kind of stuff. And I can only imagine like the design work. My brother is a designer, and like that's awesome. The time that it takes him to do things, like I'm really lucky because like most of what I do just is me pounding the keyboard and like, hit and send, and writing stuff is simple in a sense. for me,
In a
right?
sense.
And I get that, like, it's, everybody has like the thing that they do, and that's what makes us all unique and beautiful. But, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, kind of like that you mentioned even, was, your shoe with We Are Underdogs and the Planter shoe, obviously, like, as somebody who, is a designer and like getting to toy with those things, is there anything that you learned from that process other than, like you said, talking about like the negativity that you're going to see on Twitter and stuff? Because I'm one of those people that, I mean, you can't really see it on camera, but like, I'm surrounded by sneakers, right? And like, I have a massive collection, and, I don't say that to brag at all, because it's more of a pain than it is not, right? But, when I got into sneakers, I was writing for, blogs and, all these places. And I just figured that if I was going to be talking about sneakers and you wanted to really like appreciate my opinion, then I better show you that, look, I'm buying all these things to show you that, like, I'm experienced them all,
Right.
like, I'm not just buying one thing because I like it and saying it's the best thing ever. Like, I'm going to have the stuff that maybe you won't like, because I want to be able to compare them. So like, to me, sneakers is a much different beast than for most people who are just like, oh, that's ugly. Like, oh, it's just too over branded. But like, I also, personally, I'm a fan of like, racing. So like the marketing aspect of labeling things and like creating products specifically to have a brand name out there is always a fascinating thing to me. So what was your experience like? I guess the We Are Underdogs thing is really fascinating because they give you a little bit more creative freedom, I think, than most of the companies that are out there. And so
absolutely,
I have two real questions. One is, how feasible do you think those partnerships are to turn into a much bigger opportunity where, like, let's say it was so well received that you were just like, I'm going to go double down and we're going to release 3 shoes this time. How feasible is that in this current state of sneakers, in your opinion? And then with the Planters thing, could you talk a little bit about the challenges or, the working with like a big major company like that, right? Because obviously when you need to have brand colors, and you have a very specific experience with this because of your design work, you're aware of those things, I think, more so than anybody that I know. So could you talk a little bit about those two things?
Yeah. So starting off with Planters, actually, you know what? I can just grab it. Grab the shoe quick. Starting off with Planters, it was interesting because I originally wasn't even supposed to design the shoe. What happened was that Vayner Media reached out, and so basically the way that it worked was there was Planters, there was Vayner, which was facilitating the whole thing, and then there was me. And they had reached out because I had worked with one of the guys in their social team, and he's like, I know that you do sneaker reviews. I'd love for you to review the shoe that we have coming out. And I was like, okay, cool. And then I was like, well, do you have a picture of it? And they sent this picture of the sample, and not to hate on it, but I it was one of those things where I saw it and I was like, I can't say good things about the sneaker, so I don't want to do a video for it. And so I talked to my manager about it, and I was like, well, do you think there's a way that like I could pitch the idea of designing it for them? Because that's when I was really trying to get into the design space. And so he's like, yeah, might as well. I mean, what do you have to lose? So we pitched that idea. And they're like, sure, that'd be great. And so the idea was showing a little bit of the design process and then also designing the shoe and sort of being involved in that way. So I did, and it was a very, very short experience because it was really late on in the process that I was involved. So the midsole tooling of the shoe and the outsole had already been chosen. And obviously, if you're familiar with, I'm sure I know you are, but the people watching, if you're not familiar with the way that I guess midsoles and outsoles come together, this is by far the most expensive part of the shoe because you have to open a mold, which is cutting metal, which is thousands and thousands of dollars. So when you're doing a smaller project like this, where only a couple, I think it was like maybe 1,500 shoes were made, it's just not worth the $20,000 to $30,000 investment per size or whatever it is to create the midsole and outsole. So they find a pre-made one from a manufacturer in China, and then they ship them to, in this case, Garrison in Philly to actually build the shoe around it. So for that, we had the midsole designed already, and they wanted it to be. They just said, we want a shoe that looks like something Mr. Peanut would wear. And so I'd always wanted to design like a really classic looking leather basketball sneaker. And while it wasn't the perfect scenario for me to do that because it had to be still Peanut themed, I really wanted to use like really nice leathers and suedes and make it sort of the high top sneaker that I would want to wear if I was playing basketball in like the, the 80s or 90s. And so that was sort of the inspiration behind it. And I just really love I was really inspired by like I think it was Reebok Kamikaze, and also trying to morph the shape of a peanut into the paneling on the side of the shoe. So originally this started out as a peanut shape on the side, and then I kind of was like, well, that's terrible. So I was trying to just play with the lines and create something that looked more like an interesting sneaker. And then obviously the colorway was heavily defined, and the logo on the tongue was heavily defined by the brand itself. But it was a really interesting project working with the brand and sort of sending them ideas and being like, well, I really like this. And they're like, well, as nice as that is, or as terrible as that is, it doesn't work with our brand language. So there was definitely a back and forth there. And that's something I don't think people realize, especially people, on the outside looking in, like how little, in a lot of cases, how little designers or collaborators actually have, how little weight they actually have when it comes to collaborations. Like I did a video for New Balance and Herschel like a year ago. And one of their main selling points in the video was that Herschel was like, well, this is the first time New Balance has actually let anyone sort of change the way their sneaker looks rather than just changing the colorway. And for me, that was really eye-opening because I was like, wow, I thought with collaborations, you have just free reign, but you don't. You really don't. It really depends on what the brand is willing to give you. And in New Balance's case, at least last year, things have obviously changed now, but it was like they really kept those collaborations locked down. And I think to your next question, the reason We Are Underdogs was so special is because the whole brand was basically it's a love child by a sneaker company in Portugal that basically does a lot of private label stuff, but they wanted to create something that gave people who don't usually have the opportunity to create sneakers that chance. So they had initially, the way I heard about them was through Wear Testers. Nightwing had actually designed a shoe with them, or was working on a shoe with them and talking about that process. And so I was designing shoes on my own, and they eventually reached out because I forget, I reviewed a sneaker. I think it was I reviewed someone's sneaker for them, and I got contacted through there, and they're like, we'd love to give you the opportunity to design a sneaker because we see that you love design. And that was a very, very open process where they're like, design whatever you want. The only thing is we have to basically choose. You have the choice to choose 4 different midsole, outsole tooling options, all of which I wasn't a huge fan of. But regardless, I ended up picking the one that I thought was the least, the one that I thought would work with the most things because I didn't know what the design was going to be yet. And looking back, I probably would have chosen a different midsole, outsole based on the way the shoe came out. But so that was really great. I got the chance to fly out to Portugal and see the whole process from sketching to sampling to a final product, and that was like a really incredible experience. And it also gave me a much better understanding of how difficult it is to actually do what these sneaker designers do every day, and also seeing a really nice almost designer quality sneaker coming out with like super nice materials, sourced from 5 miles from this factory in Portugal versus, what most brands do, which is they go for the cheapest option and try and create something that looks like it's high quality, but really it's very, very cheap. So it was definitely a very eye-opening experience. And I've been very lucky. And actually, I'll just say it. We have I think they're doing a project. I know they're doing a project with We Are Underdogs where they're taking the 6 designers that have done sneakers so far with them, and they're giving us all the same midsole and outsole, and they're saying design whatever upper you want on it. So that's sort of, I think, as far as the announcement's gone. But we've all worked on sneakers. I know it's me, it's Nightwing, it's some other people, and so we'll have sneakers coming out that are completely different than anything we've done so far in the next couple months. So that's been a really cool sort of follow up to the original collaboration. But yeah,
that's awesome, man. Congrats. I mean, that's
Thanks,
so cool that it turns. I think the perception from people that don't work on these types of projects is very much like, it's easy that you're going to work with the same people over and over again, right? But that's 100% not the case unless it works, right? It has to work in order for you to want to work with people again. And so just having them and bring on another partnership with you to do more is says a lot about your work with them. But I guess what's the timeline for that? Could you give kind of a rough idea of, I guess, even comparing the two, right? Where you came into a project with Planters and it's almost set in stone, right? Also, I just should commend you on saying, hey, this is not something I can just co-sign and put on my channel, because the perception by a lot of people out there that watch YouTube and, you know, follow sneakers casually is that you just do whatever comes to, you know, to your doorstep and you take every opportunity. But, you know, it is really important to note those kind of things. And it's a really tough thing to do when you're sitting there, you know, sometimes with the opportunity to do something that is going to put food on your table and walking away from it. So I think that's important to kind of, you know, emphasize there. But what's like the timeline in comparing those two, you know, from, you know, We Are Underdogs being like obviously a longer process, I would assume, versus the Planters. And what's that look like for you as, you know, and even in terms of like where you step into the YouTube world from that process and bring people along?
With the Planters one, I'm not sure how long it was going beforehand, but from when I actually sent in my very first like line drawing sketch on a piece of paper to when it was actually in my hands, I think was maybe about 3 or 4 months, which is just insanely fast. And I think that there's a lot to be said of working with a factory in the United States, just because they're able to turn around samples so quickly versus a factory in China where it's going to take 3 to 4 weeks to even see anything. So I think that had a lot to do with it. And also it was a small size run. With We Are Underdogs, it was a longer process. It was probably more from when I first started design, like my first call with the founder of the company to when the shoe actually came out. I think it was more like maybe 7-8 months. And that was still a pretty expedited process. And I think it really just depends on sort of your manufacturing, like especially with We Are Underdogs. Even then, like, again, it was a factory that the guy who runs the company has such a great connection with, and they're willing to do samples for him like really quickly. Whereas, you know, if you're working with a random factory that you found in China or even one that you found in Italy or Portugal, if you don't have that connection, you know, they're going to put you at the end of the list and it's going to take some time. And it's really interesting to see, what I've really been excited about after being a part of this process is seeing the people who have started their own brands. Like, I'm trying to John Geiger, and there was, there's this other brand I really like on Sia Collective. I know they have some beef. I don't get involved. Yeah. I don't know anything about it, but it's fun to see their process and see how they actually have done this basically from scratch. At least I don't have any contact with them, so I don't know what their process is, but assuming it's from scratch and seeing how interesting it is, and how different it is from the process of working with another company. Like I'm lucky enough that I have a company paying for all of it, like paying for all the materials, paying for all the manufacturing. Yeah. Whereas there, it's like they're paying for it themselves. They're doing it from scratch. They're paying for all the molding and tooling, and that's just a whole new level of respect, you know. And it's cool to see.
Yeah, definitely. It is kind of funny. Like that's kind of something I wanted to, I guess, get a little bit into, not to like put you on the spot, but like the conversation around those types where like you have John and I forget, you know, Sia Collectives, I forget the guy's name, but like I personally have known John for a really long time. So, awesome. You know, like you know, like I'm kind of in a weird spot with that situation specifically, but like, I just don't understand the kind of internet beef thing at all. You know, like if anything, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so I know that rap beef always ends poorly. So why are we doing this in any other world, right? So I kind of want to just tie this into, you know, like, do you have any, you know, tips or practices to avoiding that kind of stuff, but also like just the negativity that comes, right? Because I think, let me say this in the right way. The Planter shoe to me is, you know, it's not a shoe that I might wear, but it's personally, I think it's super dope because it's the opportunity that you had. And on a marketing side where I work on a regular basis, I'm trying to get those big companies to see that this is going to get some attention. But how do you personally, you know, kind of just deal with the negativity that comes from putting yourself out there on a regular basis? Because obviously, you know, YouTube comments and Twitter and social media can just be a absolute, you know, terror show for people that are creating as much content as you are too, right? Like, because the more you do, the more people, you know, the bigger your audience, the more, you know, you can't have people just hating for no reason. So is there anything that you do to kind of, you know, disconnect from that or avoid it, or, you know, whatever those tips might be for the, you know, the 16-year-old kid that might be coming up in the YouTube world or whatever?
Um, well, I think first off, with the beef stuff, I think there's this perception online that when someone tries to do something like that with you or is very negative towards you, and there's the opportunity to start something, there's this perception that that'll bring a lot of eyes to my channel because that stuff's fun to watch. It's like the TMZ of whatever, which at the end of the day, like you said, it never ends well. And what'll happen is, even if it does seem like it's, for example, like there's, I don't know, on the sort of, with some of the newer sneaker YouTubers I noticed over the last couple of years, there was this whole like weird live stream thing going on where they'd be sort of beefing with each other, and those live streams would do well. But at the end of the day, once that all sort of died down, you're not going to have long-time viewers. You're not going to have people who are invested in you. You're going to have people who want to see drama. And that's just not the kind of people that you want on your channels. Well, maybe it is, but not for, I think, people who are really serious about what they're doing and people who really have a passion for sneakers. So there's that. And also, especially when it comes to negativity, what I found is that the smaller you are, the less that you get. However, the smaller you are, the less that you get. But the ones that you do get mean a lot more, and they're a lot more hurtful because it's like the first time you're experiencing it. And so the bigger that I've gotten, the more that I've realized that people are just hating for no reason. And it's like, I think there's an important distinction of trying to figure out like when someone's giving you criticism, and while it might not be phrased in the best way, it's important to listen to, because, you know, no one's perfect, and everyone can always improve in what they're doing. So it's interesting to try and weed out just the crap from the actual criticism of someone who's saying something because they genuinely, while it might be said in a very rude way, it genuinely might actually be a better direction to take. And I think, especially when you're creating anything, you're going to get that, and it's going to hurt because it's your thing that you're putting out there. But it's, you kind of get numb to it. And there's some sort of best practices that I've kind of learned is that as much as you want to read some of those comments, it's just not worth it. And that again, you know, it's the other problem again of, well, sometimes you want to read some of those comments so you can learn from it and grow from it. But I don't know, man. It's just a very like, it depends on what kind of mood I'm in that day is whether I'll read those comments or not. But
yeah, it's funny because like I guess like in a sense I got lucky because I started in this stuff in the writing world and like really maintained that and stayed in like the business side of things. So other than my years at Complex, you know, like where I literally had, you know, people saying like, don't come to my city. You won't, you know, like death threats over stuff because, and I'm just like, dude, it's like if you ever read anything that I wrote or anything that Russ or I wrote on Complex, the giant list of, you know, you're an idiot sneakerhead when was the number one thing on the list was always like that you get offended by this because we're talking about ourselves, right? Like we are the people we're making fun of, you know? So it's always been a funny thing to me, but I think that, you know, as this year, especially like hostility is just at an all-time high and it transitions to all different places. But I think, you know, I think it's good to hear that you both look at them, you know, and it depends on the day, right? Because that makes it real for a lot of people. And I think that my goal with kind of the content that I'm, you know, putting out and starting to put more out of is to kind of showcase that kind of stuff, right? Like people, you know, I'm really lucky to have worked in this, but like, I don't have like a public facing, you know, like the way, you know, you guys do in the YouTube space, but like everyone probably knows me because I love this stuff. Like I'm going to go find people to work with and do stuff with. But that also is like, you know, how do I bring my expertise in this? Right. And part of that is like, you know, kind of what you're saying about working with planters and working with Vayner and like those types of things are kind of like, I love to be kind of in between that kind of situation. Right. Because I don't necessarily want to be a manager and I don't want to like, you know, do those kind of things, but like, I have a lot of experience on the business side of this, but I'm also the guy on the business side of it that refuses to take his hat off and is always going to wear sneakers. Right. So I'm a different business person than a lot of people experience. And I think Vayner has done a good job of that too. Like their business is modeled kind of around that whole, like, you know, it's not about professionalism, even though it is, but it's like the perception is like, hey, this is just life. Let's just do it and we'll get it done. Yeah. So I guess to kind of take a step back, like with your YouTube stuff, how, like, at what point were you able to kind of transition to like a full-time thing? You know, I obviously with the design stuff, you probably have like more of a challenge in saying, I'm fully going to commit to YouTube as a career, because at least in my experience, most of the people that put in the work to become an actual designer and have that education, they don't want to like just walk away from that because they're passionate about it, like to some extent, right? You might not be passionate about every project, but that's kind of life, right? So what did that transition look like to you? And what were kind of like, maybe like the first time where you're like, oh, this YouTube thing could be, like lucrative for me?
It was like the end of 2017 coming into 2018. I had started my channel. Like it's weird. I've always been like in love with YouTube, and I've been doing like stupid YouTube videos on and off since like 2007. Like the first YouTube video that I really like tried, and I really tried to put some effort into it, was back in 2007 when the Xbox 360 Elite came out. I did a review, and it somehow it got 300,000 views. And at the time, I should have just kept going because I could have been the next MKBHD. I don't know what I was thinking, but I was so mad at myself. But so that was throughout the years. I'd tried channels on tech, I tried music channels, things like that. But I never really realized how I never really got into, I would always been into sneakers, but I'd never thought to like look up sneakers on YouTube. And because of that, I'd never thought to do that. And when I really started to realize that, so it took probably about a year and a half to really start making more than like a couple $100 a month, which to be still good. But when it really started getting big was at the end of 2017 around Christmas time. And it was like, I was starting to make as much as my paycheck at work. And I was like, wow. And then I was like, okay, well, what's sort of my out? How do I start doing this full time? Because as much as I love design, doing YouTube as a full-time career is a dream job. So I was really starting to look into that. And then my company that I was working at the end, literally the day after I filed my taxes, and I was like complaining at work. I was like, dude, I just paid this YouTube thing, screwed me, man, because I had to pay so much in taxes. That very day, they're like, you know what? We're laying off a bunch of people and you're fired. And I was like, yo, what? And so I was just so grateful that it was the perfect time. And as much as it hurt, because I'd never been fired before, it was like one of the most there was like a week where I just stopped making videos and I was sitting in my room like, what the hell did I do wrong? Like, why am I getting fired when all my friends are still there and like all this sort of stuff. So it really it was really a hit, but I was so blessed in the fact that I'd been doing YouTube as a second thing for 2 years at that point. And it was really at a point where I could really focus on it. And then when I focused on YouTube, I was making like double what I was making my old job like 3 months later. And then it just kept progressing. And it was like, that's when I knew like, okay, I can never work, at a job like that again. I want to always keep pushing. And whether YouTube is there or not, I want to always be doing my own thing, because there's this feeling of like, when the amount of work that you put in is the amount of return that you get, versus going into work and no matter how hard you work, you're going to get a standard paycheck. That feeling like, and experiencing that for the first time, I was like, wow, this is like, it's almost like addicting. And so that was the idea of, and I think even if I'd been making less money, I still would have just gone for it, because it was one of those moments that I don't think I'm ever going to get again, especially now that I'm married and, eventually we'll have kids. And it's like, I had to take that leap when I did, because I don't think it would have that was a time where I could afford to not be stable,
Yeah. Yeah.
And, yeah.
It's funny. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Aglet app, but like it's yeah. So like I was on their podcast this week and was talking to them about to Azim about just synchronicity, right? Like my whole journey in this stuff has been, I'm really lucky, man. Like I like can't, it like gets me emotional to think about it, because stuff just happened that I did not expect to happen. People open doors for me. And like my goal is to do that for other people, right? Like that's how I measure my success, because like all along the way, there's been things where you're just like, what, how does that happen? And that's exactly what you're talking about, right? Like that whole synchronicity, that whole like, what is it? The saying is like, coincidence. There's no such thing as coincidence, right? Like the fact that you're experiencing that one, that's like potentially like the worst feeling you might have ever had, right? Like losing your job, especially in a job like that you're in, is incredibly disheartening. And you almost need to feel that pain to look and be like, man,
absolutely,
that way up on YouTube and doing this other thing is the joy that I feel, right? Like, cause I think that's another, like another conversation, but like maybe someday we'll get into that in a different realm. But the whole idea of creating revenue streams to me has always been like, this is what I have always been about, right? Like I've had jobs for a year or 2 or 3 here and there. And I love being around people. Like,
same,
prior to this, 2020 situation with the pandemic, I would almost have a job just to be social, right? Like, cause I could 100%. Work as a writer. I could work as a freelancer. You could probably do the same thing in design, but you're sitting in your room for days or weeks at a time. And you're like, man, I just want to go grab a coffee with somebody, right? Like I want to go stand by the water cooler in the office. And like people don't understand how that works, because the perception for anybody that works in a job is like, I just don't want to be here Monday through Friday, 50, 60 hours a week. And I totally understand that. But there are challenges on the other side of that, which, I think the whole idea of creating revenue streams and, just freeing up your own time, right? Because you mentioned something I think is just poignant. And, even though we're talking about sneakers, the idea that, that you could have a job and let's say you get paid, let's say you're just getting paid, $15 an hour. Mm-hmm. There are very few things in my life that I would be willing to do a whole hour for $15.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
Like there are some TV shows that I won't even watch for $15. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so you start to think of it in that way, right? Where you change that, you shift that whole way of thinking and like, making your time, not letting somebody else take away from the value of your time. And so I think that also kind of leads me into like one of the other things I wanted to talk about, with your process in like creating videos. Mm-hmm. How do you mentioned like, maybe a 3-hour video. Obviously that's refined over, 13 years of making videos now. But like, what are some of the things that you would suggest for, like the up and comers, or the people that are just curious about YouTube? Because I think, and you obviously would probably agree to this, but like YouTube still is the platform that creates the most opportunity for people to be independent from work for other people, right?
100%.
You can't quite do that anywhere else. Everywhere else has advertisements that are monetized based on, the flow of information from everyone, where YouTube, it's kind of like you can control a huge majority of it, not all of it, but like, so what for you are some of the things that you do to make that process a little bit easier and refine that, so you don't have the, 6 weeks on a video type stuff, or, or even if like that, cause I think that becomes a part of the mix of content that people do, right? You want to do those big projects because that's what you're passionate about. But are there things that you've found that work better for you than others?
It's been, for me, honestly, the thing that really has been the biggest eye opener over the last couple of years has been focusing on SEO. And really how important titling and thumbnails are for videos, and even the description that you write, because Google takes that all into account. And no matter how good a video is, if the title and thumbnails suck, no one's going to watch it. And that's what sucks, because you can put your heart and soul into something and then it gets no views. And that's even with good titles and thumbnails, that still happens. It just depends on how the algorithm's feeling. I think for new people, the best piece of advice I could have is, for the first couple months, you're going to hate everything that you put out, and maybe you don't, but that's one thing that I found in talking to a lot of people. And it's, no matter how good it is, it's just that self-consciousness that you kind of got to break through. And then the farther you get, it's just having the perseverance to stick it out until, even if for years you're not seeing a lot of return on your time. If that's something you're really passionate about, you just got to stick it out. And then for the more advanced people, the SEO thing is just so important. It's really like, it's, for example, like I think the reason that I was able to get traction like a year or two into it was because I was really focusing on reviewing shoes that I knew were going to be popular, but also I was titling the video, the name of the shoe, the different variations of the name of the shoe. I was putting all the different shoe names in the description, and like going on Google Trends and looking what's trending. So like, for example, last year, like sneaker releases, actually for good example, my sit or sell videos. While I call the series sit or sell, if you're not familiar with it, it's a series where I talk about like the shoes that are coming out and whether I think, just adding a little element of gamification, saying like whether I think the shoe is going to sit or sell. I titled the videos 2020 sneaker releases because 2020 sneaker releases is what's trending. It's always trending. So I titled it 2020 sneaker releases sit or sell, even though sit or sell is the main name of the series, because it helps find a much larger audience, because people who are searching for release dates on Google will find my videos. as well as like the Foot Locker release calendar. And that's just been such a huge thing because it's like, for example, like one of my biggest videos was the Off-White Air Jordan ones, the Chicagos when they first came out. And yes, I was really lucky because I got them really early because I got to an event. But like at the same time, the reason it got the views is because everyone was searching Off-White Jordan 1s, and just having all the different variations of Off-White Jordan 1 in the description helped with search terms. So when people went on YouTube, if they typed in like Off-White 1, my video would still come up versus someone who typed in Off-White Air Jordan 1, So there's some people who like will only just title a video like, I don't know, Yeezy. It's like the new Yeezy 350s. Well, that's great. But like no one's searching for that. They're searching for like the Yeezy, reflectives or whatever. I don't know. Yeezy 380. Yeah. So it's important to have all those little searchable phrases that you can use so that you can get the most visibility possible.
Yeah, man. That's amazing because like that's honestly what I've made most of my career doing, right? Like
that's awesome.
You could search for things, so I basically started in this in like 2007 or so, right? And kind of moved around from blog to blog over the years, over whatever that has been 13 years. But one of the things that like I really dove into at the very beginning was like kind of this like nerding out over SEO, right? Because I just felt like, hey, this is something interesting. I'm fascinated by it because I mean, I love the sneakers and I love the writing part, but like if I can have a little bit of an advantage because I'm thinking about this other stuff, right? And it's just crazy because like that turned into, I mean, I've done SEO work for almost every company that I've worked for, but I've also done work for most of those companies as a consultant or a contractor, even after working for them as an employee. So, I think it's incredibly important. And I think like, people don't necessarily think about it, but YouTube is the biggest search engine on the planet, right? Like Google is the default, but like people are really searching YouTube more than they're searching anywhere else. And I think as people are able to recognize that, it's awesome too, because for me, as somebody who really wants to see the business of footwear and the business of sneakers just continue to grow and bring new people in, having those types of thoughts and creating based on that, or, having those thoughts while you're creating, right, allows new people to see products that they wouldn't normally see, right? Like, being into sneakers, we have, I don't know, maybe 20% of the sneakers that everybody knows about, but like, it's the We Are Underdogs of the world that it's like, we need to showcase these guys making these beautiful shoes. Like they are incredibly well made, but like they don't have like a big, massive following and they're not going to be on some super famous person's feet or anything. Maybe not right now, maybe in the future, who knows? But like, I love the idea of bringing all of these elements in because it kind of is just like, it raises everything up, right? So like next thing you know, you're doing a video about, a pair of Asics and people are like, oh, like I didn't even know about Asics, or they're like, I knew about that Asics, but I didn't realize this Asics was a thing. So like now all of a sudden you're like opening people's eyes up to new things. And I think one, like as a consumer, they can get into it, but two, if they're really passionate about it, who knows? Maybe they're working at Asics or We Are Underdogs in the future, right? Because you've kind of almost played the system to be in front of them, and I think that's a really cool thing. One thing that I think we should talk about, though, you mentioned, being, like you're in Philly or in New York?
Philly. Yep.
Philly. Okay.
I was in New York until 2018, and then I moved down to Philly.
Okay, cool. Are you from Philly originally?
I'm from Baltimore originally.
Oh,
I'm a
okay.
big Ravens
cool.
fan.
Yeah. All right. Oh, that's right. That's right. I knew that. Yeah. I was thinking about, like your Off-White Jordan 1, right? Mm-hmm. That whole access to events and stuff is a big deal, right? Like me being in LA, for the past few years, like that was the reason for me being there, like moving to New York and working at Complex, like, you kind of want to be in those massive hubs so you can get to those events. But I think that there's also something we talked about before we started recording is like just the relationship building and the relationship management and like keeping in touch with people. So what is that like for you, and how, like how do you balance that with, what you do? Because obviously you get access to a lot of shoes early. Sometimes that's being in the right place physically. But sometimes that's, potentially years of just being friends with people and maintaining relationships. How much does that play into like what you do, and like what would you suggest to the younger generation or, the newcomers into the space as to like, how do you kind of, I guess, balance that, right? Because, you're not always going to be best friends with everybody. And I think that's a challenge that people don't realize behind the scenes. Like, I've been on both sides. I've been on the side where people are asking me for shoes. I've been on the side where I'm asking for shoes, either for me to create content or for another company. And I don't think people fully understand the challenges that come with kind of, I guess, playing that game, so to speak. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've found most valuable, I guess, in the whole YouTube thing, and especially what you were talking about, is that these events like ComplexCon and like SneakerCon, while they're fun, especially from a consumer point of view, because you're buying things and you're being around people, like-minded people. For me, it's like a field day. It's like I get to see everybody that I'm friends with at once, and I think that's it is so important, because then you meet new people who like you would never expect to. Like, for example, I think the first time I met you in person was at ComplexCon, right? Or had I met you in person beforehand? ComplexCon.
I think it's ComplexCon,
like, yep. And it's just like you really cultivate these friendships that, yes, while initially they started out sometimes as business relationships, other times it's like they become your best friends. Like a lot of people that, for example, a lot of YouTubers, like especially in sneaker YouTubers, are really good friends of mine. I talk to them on a very regular basis because they're just good people. And so it's good from a personal point of view, but also, again, like you never expect to meet certain people, and you never expect other people that you would never think would be watching your content or watching your content. And so in that way, it's very fulfilling, and it's sort of a nice way of proving to yourself that you're actually doing something and people actually care about what you're making. But then for the brand side of things, I guess from a content point of view, there's definitely a little bit of a competitive side. And that's what kind of stinks, because like everyone's trying to come out with reviews or videos on the same shoes at once, and you're always trying to not beat everyone else, but trying to sort of get a piece of the pie, of the view pie. It's there's always a struggle of like, can you get that shoe first? Or for me, one thing that's been really interesting is that like now that YouTube is really a business for me, and I have to look at it from a business point of view, it's like, is it worth me paying $1,000 for resale for a shoe? Versus waiting for it like early to get it early versus waiting for it to come out and paying like $300. Will the views, it's either, will the video make enough money to pay off the shoe? Will I get enough new viewership to make the shoe worth it, even if I'm spending money? Or is it like a waste of money? And it's a lot. It's sometimes I'll buy, like, for example, I think the last one shoe that I bought that I regretted was the Off-White Nike Dunks. I bought them like a month early, 2 weeks early from Stadium Goods for like $1,300. Thinking that the video would get like 500,000 views, and it got like 100,000 views, which is still great, but it made nowhere near enough to pay off the shoes. And I didn't really get new subscribers from it. So it's a little bit of that. Like there's a little bit of gambling almost going on. But then there's also the interesting aspect of like when you work with brands, like maintaining a relationship with them. And then also it's interesting watching some of the favoritism that brands have too, and how certain people get certain shoes versus other people. And while yes, with some brands, I'm definitely on the receiving end of that. I'm not going to deny that. But sometimes it's like, damn, that person, like, he got this crazy shoe, and his content, like, if I had gotten that shoe, I would have put out so much, like my content would have been crazy. And there's definitely a bit of that. And so it's a lot of, you've got to really practice a lot of humility with it and realize that like, you're not owed this product. This is not owed to you. You have to earn it. And even when you earn it, it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, it's not because you're just a great person. It's because you're going to put out content on it. You're really going to make it worth your while, or make the brand's while worth it, So it's interesting. It's a very interesting sort of, I guess, social climate going on within the business side of things, which I don't think people realize is there. But so far, I mean, I can honestly say that everyone that I've met through this, through sneakers and through social media so far, I've really liked. There's not been one person I've met that I've been like, that guy's a dick. Like, I don't want to talk to that guy ever again. Like, and maybe they're just putting on a nice face, but so far I think I've made more friends than anywhere else in life. It's crazy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's 100% for me, the truth. Like, it just is unreal how many, I mean, I'm sure there are bad people out there, but I think the nature of, I'm sure the nature of it though is like, especially with like social media, right? Like the perception of who someone is on their channels is completely different than what, if you know them, right? Like
Totally.
I mean, you could look at you. I mean, there's so many YouTubers that are like that, right? Like they play it up so much, but then when I see them in person, they're just so like grateful to see me. Like I'm grateful to see them. And it's like, it's not that whole like show, right? But like that's YouTube, right? It's the entertainment aspect of it is, you know, people are getting better and better at like putting on that face and that character, you know, and I think that's something that people as consumers, not everybody realizes, you know, like that's a character, right? They're playing it up so it's more entertaining for you. You know, they're probably a much more reserved or much more chill person in real life, but it kind of is one of those things too that makes me think of like my experience at Finish Line so Finish Line had never sent out product before, like, you know, Brandon Edler and I went and started working there, and we kind of set up that whole program. And now like Kim has, you know, kind of taken it over, and it's like they do a really good job, right? They're really refined. And I think, you know, the challenge that we went into that, and it was, you know, part of my experience at Complex being like a media person that, you know, having that Complex name next to mine is like people instantly are just like, let me just throw you everything, right? Let me just like, if you talk about it on Complex, you know, cause it's a PR person, right? They're trying to get exposure. So there's value for them if you do anything with it, whether it's your personal accounts or the Complex accounts. So at Finish Line, when Brandon and I started there, we kind of like sat down, and he and I are like probably best friends, you know, anyone could have, right? Like we don't talk all the time, but like we're just like always in sync and like always, like, you know, really care about each other. But one of the things that we sat down as I started, cause he started there a few months before me, but like I basically said like, look, I don't want to be the company that sends product out to just everyone that, you know, it doesn't help anyone, right? Because it puts you in a tough spot. It puts me in a tough spot. Cause if I'm sending you a product that you don't like, one, I'm expecting even if it's unspoken, even if I know you don't like the product, I'm hoping that you're going to do something with it to get me some exposure, right? As a PR, whatever you want to call that person. But on the other side, you're looking at this shoe like, I don't want to talk about this shoe, or I don't want to talk about this, you know, like it doesn't make sense. So that balance is really challenging. And I think that, you know, I'm trying to like kind of unveil some of those things for people because they see that, and there is a lot of, you know, favoritism. There's a lot of who got this first, who got this, you know, last time. And on the business side, you're always trying to appease everybody, and you can't, right? Like you just don't physically have enough pairs of shoes to send to people, and you can't control how quickly they get them. So if you send everybody in the country shoes on the same day, some people get it tomorrow and some people get it in 4 days. And that's just a terrible thing for the nature of YouTube. But I think that it's interesting to hear you talk about that on the receiving end of a lot of that and like what you go through, because part of what I think is really fascinating about YouTube is that it's so competitive, consumer facing, but everybody's friends, maybe not everybody, but like I'd say 90% of the people that do sneaker YouTube are friendly with each other every time I see them. And in my, you know, work over the past decade or so, it's been awesome because I'm able to bring these people together and sometimes, you know, do things kind of like you're talking about with We Are Underdogs and what you got coming up. And I think those types of things ultimately, you know, like level the playing field, right? Like you get to come and see like, hey, look, Seth got this pair before I did, but like, look, I'm just sending, you know, 10 pairs of shoes out. I can't control all of the things, but like, it's a really challenging thing. And I think that there's real, I guess, knowledge and like something special about what you're talking about of like thinking about it from a business perspective. Most people don't go that far with it, right? Like they think, you know, hey, I'm just going to get a pair of shoes, but like, you know, not everybody's cut out to, you know, be really analytical, and not everybody's cut out to just look at a numbers base because, you know, and it doesn't always impact everything. I'm sure sometimes you're just like, I just like that shoe and I'm going to pay for it because I want that shoe and I want to do a review on it. But I do think that that's a really interesting point of like, hey, you know, as a business, sometimes it's worth spending that money to get it early. And it's not about like somebody getting it to you early. It's about you taking the initiative, which I think a lot of people that are coming into creating around sneakers should think about, because that's a really like, just taking the initiative is a huge step in the success that's going to come from that, right? Because we all have the nature of like looking around us and looking at our peers and saying like, oh, they got that and I didn't get it, or like I really wanted that one, and it's like I know we all have it. It's awesome to hear you talk about it too, because I think the perception for people that see all of your followers and all of your views is like, oh, he just gets everything for free, right? Like I'm sure you see that in the comments even. But
oh yeah, yeah.
So I think, because you mentioned like the humility aspect of it, what would be, or is there a moment that you could, kind of go back to where maybe you either kind of hit the wall as far as, the feeling of like, should I be doing this? Or maybe it's something where you just like felt like you made a mistake and like you kind of had to like reel it back in and be like, hey, that's on me, and move forward. Are there any moments that you could look at and be like, that was a moment that I had to take and learn from it in this whole process of growing your channel?
There's been a bunch. I think there's one thing I've realized is that people really don't like when you break character. And I'll say that I try, not even on purpose, but just the person that I am on YouTube, I feel like it's pretty similar to the person that I am in real life. Just one, because I'm not a great actor, so I wouldn't be good at and I feel like people really resonate with authenticity on YouTube. And I think that at least, with like the big guys like Tony and Bull and Kais and Cousteau or Jacques, they're all like very similar to who they are online. And I think people really resonate with that. And that's why they're so big. The one time, one specific example I can think of was it was right when all the Off-White sneakers came out. I was working with a sneaker company or a sneaker resale store in New York. I think it was called Rare Pair. I don't know if it's still around, but they had gotten in a bunch of sneakers and they were like, well, you should try this idea of running around the city and pretending to sell it to people, or some stupid like YouTube-y type idea. And I was like, fine, I'll try it. Might as well. So I do this video, kind of being a dick in this video, like running around, just like going up to people, just like not something that I would do personally. Just because I was trying to get the views. I was trying to play off the whole YouTube and Off-White thing. And when I put the video out, it just, people hated it. They absolutely hate it. I've never had a video where I've had more dislikes than likes. And that was the first time that it ever happened to me. And I was like, holy crap. So I took it down and I was like, I can't do anything like this again. And while I think there's a lot of, you can learn from something like that, I think that was one of those things that I just, like, for example, like if you're playing Madden and then your team just gets blown out and the announcer's like, well, they're just going to scrap that footage. That's one of those things where it's like, I'm never going to like try and learn anything from that. That was just the wrong way to go. So that's a pretty big one. But there's, I think just in anything in life, you're always failing, and you make a choice to learn from what you're failing at, or learn from your mistakes and move on from it. And you grow from that. And I think that's constant every day. Like, when you get a video that you put out and doesn't get as many views, you're like, well, why did that video not get as many views? And you learn from, the mistakes that you made, or maybe, just kind of cry about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So I guess kind of shifting gears to like get into, I guess, more of your personal preferences and tastes. What would you say is like your top 3 sneakers, like just at the moment, right? It doesn't have to be like all time. Could be just like the first 3 that come to mind right now.
At the moment, I've always been a huge Jordan 1 fan, so they're always up there. The Bread ones have always been my all-time favorite, but I'm really feeling the Chicago's at the moment. I think it's definitely has to do with the documentary and watching Michael Jordan. Because I was born in 92, so I missed a lot of it. I remember growing up with him being the best, and so there's still a little bit of nostalgia towards it, but not as much as someone who grew up in the 90s. So there's definitely understanding more of that history. There's a little bit more passion towards that particular colorway. But honestly, I'm really into New Balance right now, and I'm really loving the 992s. I really love the Joe Freshgoods 992 that came out during All-Star Weekend. I'm obsessed with that. And I've been wearing a lot of the the Soulfly 10s for some reason. I don't know why I like that shoe so much, but the Soulfly 10s, it's just such a, I always loved the linen 10s, and I never got a pair of those. And so the Soulfly 10s were sort of like, and then the materials on them are pretty solid. So it's one of those shoes that I just love wearing because it feels so premium. It looks so good. And it's just, I love that little hit of teal on the ankle too, or on the heel.
Nice, man. Yeah. I like those too. So what would be, let's say, a 16-year-old kid comes to you and is like, I've been working on my YouTube, but I want to do sneakers. What's the shoe that you give that kid to do a review on, unboxing, whatever he wants to do? But also what's your advice for him as he gets started? Or her. I shouldn't be so,
The shoe, I hate to say it, but the shoe that always gets views no matter what is the Yeezy 350. I'm so sick of that shoe. I think everybody feels like they are, but no matter what, like that shoe will get 100,000 views with your eyes closed. It's so, I hate it, but it does. Not that it's a bad shoe. I think it's a great shoe, but that's one of those shoes that I feel obligated to review, even though it's just a different colorway, because it's a tent pole for my channel. And I think for most people's channels. I guess really finding that unique thing that makes you. And that's one thing I've noticed a lot recently. Like I said, I think before our interview started, but like overall sneaker YouTube this year in particular, I think because with everything going on, the views aren't what they used to be. And it's interesting because at first I thought it was because, people just aren't as interested in sneakers, which I think is a lot of it. But you start to look at some of these smaller channels, like these upstart channels. There's one in particular called Cam's Kicks, and he sort of bases his channel off what Round 2 did, where they filmed he owns a sneaker store, I think, with his dad, and they Round 2 like films their interactions with people, and then he films his interactions with people, which I think is so interesting. And his channel is getting crazy views. Like we're talking like 60 to 100,000 views per video per day, because he drops a video every day, and like the content. It's like not the best produced. It's just like, I'm assuming a GoPro or something in the corner. Nothing against that, but like people are sucked into it, and there's still obviously a huge interest in sneakers, but it's shifted in the way that it's not so much about the hype. I think it's more about the business side of things and making money out of it. And that's why, as much as I don't think a lot of us are fans of people who resell sneakers. Nothing wrong with that, but I think there's a lot more market for that now than there was before, because people are realizing that like it's a way for them to make money, whether they're a young kid or whether they're someone who would like to have a side income. And I respect that. I think it's great, and I think it's very evident seeing the channels that are coming up now, like Cam's Kicks, and then there's another one called Boy Nova, who almost essentially makes like a Netflix documentary every week on his stuff. And while I don't love bots personally, because they always screw me out of shoes, it's so interesting seeing it from the other side. And I understand why he's getting those kind of views, because it's so interesting. And so it's interesting to see the way that sneaker YouTube has evolved from just saying, oh, the shoe is red, it's got leather on it, to like, this is how you make $1,000 a week, selling sneakers in your own store. And like, this is how you pay for rent. This is how we deal with the taxes and stuff like that. I think sneaker YouTube has matured in a way that I didn't expect, but a way that I'm really excited about. And it's kind of sucks for me because I don't have anything, like I don't put out that kind of content. So I think I need to pivot a little bit.
Well, I mean, I agree. It is really fascinating. I was just on one of my calls this last week, was talking to some people about, the nature of the younger consumer and how the thought process, they still love the sneakers, but the thought process is much different. I would say like, you're like almost directly in between. Like Cam's Kicks is a great example, right? Like you're kind of in between where he's at and where I'm at in terms of like the age range and the way you kind of got into this. And not to like toot my own horn, but like, I feel like I'm a very progressive 40 something, compared to most of the older guys that of my age who are just bitter towards everything that happened to sneakers. Right. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to embrace all of these things too. And like, as someone who like really is trying to focus on, it sounds funny, but like I'm trying to make the sneaker business better, right? Like I want the me at 17 to be able to like realize how much opportunity there is to just follow sneakers, and even as taking that a step beyond that, to change what sneakers have become. Because like I just had a conversation around sustainability. Like I spoke to nice. The California College of the Arts footwear design class a couple weeks back, and they are, there's a handful of them that are really into the hype stuff. We were talking about, Warren Lotus and Virgil and all these things that were going on in sneakerhead world, right? Yeah. But what everyone in the class got excited about was talking about sustainability, right? Because ultimately we've got to deal with this type of stuff, right? Whether we want to or not. Yeah. And, as much as I love having, hundreds or maybe even thousands of shoes, like a also realized like, I don't need all that stuff. I need to be more conscious about it, but I want to bring people in to help them kind of understand where they can fit in and where they can kind of push their way through doors that might not seem like they can be opened. And I think that is really fascinating about this younger generation in the way that they're looking at a shoe of like, like there's return on this investment, kind of like the way you're looking at it for the channel, but there's also like, there's so much more to that, right? Like there's the ebb and flow of the value of those shoes. There's the demand and when it kind of, peaks and when it goes away. Then there's also obviously the personal, like, I just want to wear this because I think it's dope. And so one of the things I wanted to like, obviously talk to you about too, is like, as much as you saying you're looking to pivot the channel, maybe, I think you kind of have, started this other side hustle, right? With this new HQ I saw on your, on your Instagram. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I started, it's funny. So with everything going on with, the pandemic, I think, there was definitely a little bit of depression that everyone was feeling at the beginning. And I was definitely feeling that, especially since like we were talking about earlier, not being able to have any social interaction. Cause I hadn't been going into an office for a year at that point, and it was just such a big blow because I was traveling so much. So I was sitting at home, just down on myself, just being an asshole, I realized that like, this is, to be honest with you, it was from watching people like Gary Vee who were like, this is your chance to do something. And I was like, you're right, I should do something. Yeah. So I reached out to a college friend of mine who I'm still very close with. And he's a designer, and he's someone that I think he works at, he works in Philly at his design job. And we had both he had been doing a lot of manufacturing overseas. And one thing I think people don't realize is even though sometimes it can be expensive, actually manufacturing a product is not that difficult. And so we were like, well, I can bring to the table an audience who's really passionate about sneakers and I've really connected with, and obviously I'm not going to sell them anything that's garbage. But I have an audience that can really get us off the ground if we can find something that would resonate with them and resonate with us. And so we thought about it for a while, and we're like, well, what can we make that, to be completely honest, has a low barrier to entry for us. Like it wouldn't be too expensive to produce, but we could get a decent return and it could really resonate with people and be a good product. And we landed on socks. And so this was probably back in April. And so what I did is I just bought all the socks I could think of, like Stance, Nike, like every brand out there, Bombas. And I just felt all the different socks. We felt with socks that I like the best. And then we started, we just were like, okay, well, we'll find a company. We'll ask them to make us a crew length sock, and we'll see if we like it. So we basically drew up a very simple design for a crew length sock with the, I guess I can show you, I've got one right here, with like the sort of stretchiness, where we want it. And we sent to a couple different factories, and we got back some samples from different factories, and we found one that we really thought was good quality. We wore it for a couple of weeks and we're happy with it. And so then, what we did is, just came up with like a name of the company because we knew that obviously that's important. And we were trying to think of something that would be not cliche and not cringy, but also be something that kind of, resonates with us. And that was Apothecary, because we really like the idea of, creating something that is so good that you're almost addicted to it, which I understand, it has different connotations. We would have, if we didn't put enough time into it, but into the name of the company, but we really were happy with the way that the branding looked and the way that it sounded, and just how, and honestly, how sort of refined it felt versus, something, like we were originally thinking of like, corner store, collective or something like that, just something that just didn't have that same sort of like refined feel to it. So we came up with some designs, we sent them out to a factory, got them back a couple weeks later. And we were just like, okay, you know what? We put about $1,200 into this each. Let's see what'll happen. So we did a launch, and I just started promoting it in every video for like a week beforehand. We took some pictures with some friends. We set up a Shopify account. We set up an LLC because we knew if something went wrong, we didn't want to get sued. Or if we did get sued, we didn't want to lose everything. So we got all the business side of things set up, and then we put it out there, expecting the stuff to sit there for a couple of weeks. But within the first, I think we actually bought about 1,200 socks initially. And we split it up between 2 drops. So I think it was about 600 socks per drop. And within the first like 3 hours, it was before we even officially launched it. We sent out an email to people who signed up for the email. We sold out, which was crazy. We didn't expect that at all. And so we're like, there might be something to this. So 2 weeks later, we did another drop, and people had saw from the first drop that they had missed out on it. So they're like, okay, we got to get this. So we didn't do a pre-drop like we did last time. We just opened it up to everybody, and it sold out in like 12 minutes. And then we're like, well, we got to start increasing numbers of stuff that we put out. So we just kept doing drops every 2 weeks and increasing the stock numbers. And so far, it's just people have just been happy with it. And we've actually only received 2 complaints about quality. One was that someone had got their sock caught on something and it tore a hole. And while that's, let's be honest, it's not our fault. We're going to give them free products and we're going to thank them for supporting the brand, that sort of stuff. It's customer service stuff. And then the other one was something about, I think it was the no-shows not fitting the way that they thought. But we've been really happy with not only the quality of product, because we wouldn't have sold it if it wasn't high quality, but also the response that we've gotten. And it's been crazy. And so it's with every drop, I mean, we're moving socks way more than we ever expected. And so it's becoming a thing where it's like actually a legitimate business now. And so we got an office space, like you mentioned, and like, we're just going to kind of keep rolling with it, keep putting out products that we really enjoy making. And people seem to be enjoying it too. And I think we just hit in a sweet spot. We were able to put out a product that was low enough barrier. Well, for example, let me, with a couple, so over the last couple of years, I've had products that I put out, like the sneakers, the We Are Underdog sneakers and things like that. And I think that with this, I try to differentiate my channel from other channels by creating things that are products and not so much merch. I've never really been a fan of merch, and I've done it in the past. I just didn't like it. There's people out there who want to support you, whether that's through Patreon, whether it's through products, whether it's whatever. And I realized that, and I with the We Are Underdog shoes, I realized that the products that we're putting out, some people are just buying because they want to support you, and not even like they don't even care about the shoe. And it sucks because the cost to enter, or the cost to buy something like that is like $200, which is a lot for a lot of people. So I think with socks, it was an affordable cost. It was $15 for a pair of socks. It gave people not only a high quality product, but if they wanted to support, they could do it that way. And that's how it started initially. But now I think it's become its own beast, where it's like its own brand that hopefully people look up to or appreciate. And so it was the perfect sort of everything coming together of creating a product that people liked, and also coming in at a good price point, and coming in at a time where people could actually, benefit from having a good pair of quality socks. I know that was like very like scatterbrained and all over the place.
No, it's great, man. I mean, I think it's how it works, right? Like, there's so much that goes into that stuff, and I think, like, I'm glad that you mentioned just the trials and, like, the conversations that you have around merch and making product, because those are all things that people don't really get to see into that thought process, right? And there's some people that, like you said, just want to support the channel, want to support you. It wouldn't matter if it was socks or if it was a bag of chips, they'd want to buy it. And they're like, $15, that's a no brainer. Right. And I think that that's one of the really interesting things about, kind of like your conversation around pivoting and like keeping the views going, and like the challenges of YouTube and being a business person, and, being, having your personal name attached to everything that's out there, is that you want to make sure it's right. And you want to make sure that even if somebody gets their sock stuck on a nail somehow, you take care of that. Right. And it's like, it's nothing for you to take care of that, but like the action for that person, it creates a lifelong fan. And
absolutely,
they're going to buy that $200 sneaker from you in a couple of years, right? Like, or whenever it is. And I think there's a really it's fascinating to me to watch all of my friends, do these things like yourself. Like, I actually really like the name Apothecary, because I think that personally, I am excited more so about maybe this is just because my girlfriend is like a beauty, makeup artist, and, worked for Glossier and all that stuff. But like, as guys, we don't do enough to take care of ourselves. Right. And I think that there's a lot of room to expand in that space, wherever you want to take it. Right. It doesn't, it might just be like, you make great socks, but one day it might be like, hey, like, we made like incredibly soft slides. We made, like it could go anywhere, right? You could be making like, shave bombs or something in the future, and it still works under that brand, where I think a lot of people don't necessarily, have that opportunity, because they get into a like, this is the comfort zone of everybody wants to buy this. And I also think that like, there's just so many ways to go about doing it. And that's what's fascinating to see, like something like you, or like, like I've known Mike and or Foamer and Buckets, for a really long time. Right. Yeah. And like, I mean, part of why I started the Patreon for Sneaker History was because I was on the phone with Fomer, and he's like, dude, you just got to do it, man. There's people that just want to support you because they like what you do. And, we don't make a ton of money off of it, but it is really amazing to see the people that just want to support and, just because they like you, and they don't really care about the shoes that you get or what you're doing. Like, they just want to support you. And I think that's such a really fascinating world where, like Uncivilized is an interesting example of like how those guys have been hesitant to make it its own brand independent from Fomer, right? It's always just on Fomer's site. And now finally they're coming around to doing that. And like, they've been doing really well with it. Right. And then you have, someone like Jacques on the flip side, who like I've been kind of harassing him to do merch for a really long time. And he's like, it's gotta be right. It's gotta be right. It's gotta be right. But I think it's fascinating. And I think it's inspiring to see like, hey, the formula of what people think is sneaker YouTube or, sneaker influencer or whatever you want to call that, right, is not the same for everybody. Like, some people it's going to make sense to have a crazy line of merch. Some people it's going to make sense to like, I really, really admire that you start with like socks and just make it a low entry point, because that's something that I think about in terms of like, like people don't necessarily want to spend $60 on a hoodie when they're going to buy, their favorite brand's hoodie. So like, you're putting yourself in a competition for their money in a way that you don't necessarily need to, but also you have the possibilities. It's just endless, right? Like, you could see the brand growing into something that the same way you probably didn't expect YouTube to grow. 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about, can you believe this? Like, you don't have an office. You've got like pop-ups in LES and, like all these places that you just like, it's cool to see starting small and like, really like you using your audience and kind of bringing them on for that journey. Because I think a lot of people, especially in the sneaker world, because we see so many people buying so many crazy shoes, and like, not everybody can spend $200 on a pair of shoes. Not everybody can, buy a shoe early. Like, that's just not possible. So like, it's okay to not have the physical shoe, and you can still be passionate about this stuff and share in this journey. And sometimes it is just like, let me just grab a pair of socks because this is going to make me feel good today and make, and it's going to, support the person that I want to watch. So, but I guess like my last question, and we'll wrap up, but like, what would be I guess like a person, brand, or project, the dream Seth Fowler opportunity in the sneaker world moving forward?
I guess in the short term, or I guess it depends on, how you think about the short term, because I think it could be a very long-term goal depending on the situation. But I would love to have a collaboration with someone like New Balance, someone who I love New Balance because I love their quality of product. I love their paneling. I love the way the product looks. That's like a dream collab for me. That would be sick. But if I'm looking farther ahead, I think it's just having the opportunity, or continuing to have the opportunity, to be able to try new things and start new businesses. And I think that's just the most exciting thing of all of it. So maybe having a larger foundation so that I can just explore and try other things, and like have that main I guess, a couple different revenue streams, like the YouTube channel, like Apothecary, and then being able to build off of that and just try things that are completely crazy, and just having the ability and the opportunity to experiment and fail, I think is my largest goal. I think would be. I know that's kind of like not a very concrete goal, but
that's a beautiful goal to have, though. I think that's super important for people to understand, because oftentimes, you're on the other end of that at 20 years old, and you're like, I've got $1,000 in the bank account, and I'm going to go make 100 t-shirts with 800 of that. And I'm going to figure out how to make the rest. And then you're like, well, shit, it didn't work. I got to go back to work tomorrow. And part of that is the process. But like, I do think that there's beauty in the opportunities to do that. Right. And I think that it's awesome that you're speaking my language. I know that's not sneakers, but like the revenue streams and the conversations, like you probably have read like 4 Hour Work Week and Tim Ferriss and those kind of things, or know familiar with them. So like, that's kind of like my Bible, right? Like I've read that book probably 30 times. I go back to it and just like, I'm never working 4 hours because I love doing what I'm doing. I love connecting with people, right? But like the thought process of that stuff that allows you the opportunity to fail, the comfort with failing, the comfort with being uncomfortable, you know, like there's so many just nuggets of gold in that. And everybody kind of learns from different people. But I hope that as I get, you know, more content out there, like I'm having conversations like this, we're talking about the other aspects of this whole sneaker world that kind of get washed under the table, you know, because of the nature of it, right? The consumerism nature of sneakers. And that's important. Like I, you know, like I'm a sucker for it. I'm a hype beast for a lot of things, and like can't, you know, like try to not buy shoes for a while. And it's like, oh, next thing you know, there's 3 pairs at the door again. You're just like, all right. But like, it's one of those things where I'm hoping to kind of open people's eyes up to the opportunities and the conversations that surround all of this stuff with sneakers as we go forward. So, I'm glad I got to connect with you and chat with you. And, it's been really fun. And I guess just
great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. So if you want to just let everybody know where they can find you, just in case they don't know.
Yeah. You can find me if you go to youtube.com/Seth Fowler. That's my main channel. That'll have links to my tech channel and to my Twitter and Instagram, things like that. But that's sort of my main hub. And then like if you want to check out the Apothecary socks, there's links in pretty much every single video, so you can check them out there. And that's pretty much everything.
Cool, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, and thanks everybody for spending the time listening to us and watching us. And we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
Peace.